The first time I walked onto a shooting range as a gun owner, I had a mixture of emotions. Some excitement, some trepidation, and the further realization that this was all becoming real. I was quiet, attentive, and very aware of the responsibility that I was carrying along with me, particularly with my youngest daughter accompanying me on this first trip to the range as a gun owner. Owning a firearm on paper is one thing. Handling it in the real world around other people is something else entirely. In this episode, I want to share what my first range trip was like, what I learned, what surprised me, and why that first experience mattered more than how well I shot, from the first shot onward. This range trip happened literally the day after I purchased my first firearm. Up to that point, outside of my military experience 20 years prior, my experience had been theoretical. Preconceived notions and stereotypes initially, followed by reading, watching, thinking. But the theory only goes so far. The range is where my theoretical experience became tangible. So before going, I made a deliberate decision. I didn't want my first experience to be unstructured or uninformed or performative or driven by ego. I mean, I had been a military officer just 2 decades ago. Surely I knew everything that there was to know about guns. No. I wanted it to be safe and structured and grounded in learning. Having my daughter there served as a stark reminder of the gravity of the circumstances and the consequences of how I would handle the responsibility of being a gun owner. So rather than just showing up on my own, which frankly would have been my prerogative, I scheduled a safety and operations lesson with the private instructor at Green Valley Range in Henderson, Nevada. That decision mattered immensely to me. It gave me permission to, again, slow down. There's a recurring theme here. To assume nothing, but to ask questions, even the ones that I thought that may have been silly. And it was an opportunity to let someone more experienced than me set the pace. Our instructor was highly proficient, patient, and genuinely welcoming. And I must admire the dexterity that he had in terms of simultaneously teaching a 51-year-old man and a 13-year-old daughter about how to operate guns when she had never touched a gun in her life. Before a single round was fired, we focused on safety. Not casually or not as a mere checklist, but deliberately. We reviewed the universal rules of firearm safety, and I want to be clear about this. These rules are not optional. They're not suggestions. They are indeed the foundation that everything else relies upon. Treat every firearm as if it's loaded. Never point the muzzle at anything that you're not willing to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And be sure of your target and what's beyond it. These rules weren't some rote recitation. They weren't rushed, but actually demonstrated in real life and repeated and reinforced. Now, I had heard these rules before, decades ago, but hearing them on the range with the firearm in hand and my daughter's in tow, that was different. They stopped being abstract. They became anchors through which we operate every time we touch a weapon. So when it finally came time to shoot, there wasn't any rush. We took our time. My daughter had her Glock 44, which is chambered in .22 long rifle, and that choice was deliberate. It has a lower recoil, it has less noise, and it was easier to focus on the fundamentals before moving on to a 9mm. Of course, I shot my Springfield Armory Echelon Comp. But even then, this wasn't about performance at this point. This was about learning and practicing the fundamentals of proficient marksmanship. The grip, the stance, sight alignment, trigger press, breathing, and let's not forget the safe manipulation of the firearm. I remember being surprised by how much mental energy went into just simply being deliberate. Not fast and not impressive, just intentional. But as my first shots in over 20 years left the barrel towards the target, I immediately received that feedback regarding my fundamentals. It wasn't perfect, but effective. Not that there was significant doubt, but I was overcome at that time with the relieving thought that, I can do this. What mattered most wasn't accuracy, not at that point. It was control. One thing that really stood out to me during that first trip was the environment itself. The people around us were focused, very respectful, and surprisingly welcoming and supportive. It wasn't this hyper bravado environment that I'd braced myself for. One through which I could navigate if necessary, but would rather not deal with, not in this circumstance. I knew enough to know that such mentality often accompanies a lack of accountability that could be downright dangerous in this space. But here, there was a shared understanding that everyone's safety depended on everyone else's behavior. And that collective responsibility made a very positive impression upon me. It made me feel welcome and safe, and reinforced the idea that shooting at its best is a community activity, not simply a solitary one. Looking back, a few things surprised me. One was how mentally demanding the experience was. It also surprised me how much I appreciated having the guidance and how little the experience resembled the stereotypes that I'd carried for years around firearm ownership. Again, there wasn't this hyper bravo activity. There wasn't a real rush or a pressure to prove anything. In this environment, I just concentrated on learning. So that first range trip did something very important for me. It transformed mere ownership into practice, and it grounded abstract responsibility in real behavior. It also clarified something very early on, and that was, if I'm going to own a firearm, I need to be committed to ongoing learning. Not occasional, not optional, but consistent. In sharing this experience with my youngest daughter was meaningful in ways that I didn't fully anticipate or appreciate until later. In this environment, she was attentive, careful, respectful, and she took the safety component seriously, which told me everything I needed to know about whether this was the right way to introduce this new activity to her. We weren't just bonding over shooting, we were bonding over responsibility as well, and it was good to see that maturation process with her manifested in this way. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from you. What was your first range experience like? Was it calm or overwhelming? Was it structured or improvised? I recognize that many people have their first experience out in federal lands or open fields with no dedicated range officer. And that's not necessarily wrong per se, it just wasn't for me this time. Did your first time shooting reinforce your interest or raise new questions? And if you haven't been yet, what's holding you back? If you're comfortable sharing, your experience may help someone else approach their first trip more thoughtfully and enhance their experience. That first range trip certainly helped to make me more confident on the range and anytime that I'm firing or handling a firearm. Simultaneously, it made me more careful, and I've come to believe that careful is a very good place to start. Shooting isn't about proving capability, it's about practicing responsibility over and over and over again. That first day reminded me that learning doesn't happen all at once. It happens one decision, one repetition, one round, and one deliberate moment at a time. Until next time, may the love of God completely cover you. From the first shot onward.